Time to check in with Chris Dimakos. He's our CJAD 800 legal contributor. And Chris, we're starting with something today. Yes, we're only about a month away from moving day, but you point out something that perhaps most people already know, but that does apply to that same day, that July 1st. So in Quebec, as it turns out, and as I said, I think most people already are aware of this, there are more couples living common law than just about anywhere else in the country. But that brings its own set of, I don't know, call them complications or things perhaps you should know. When you get to that date and you decided, you know what, I don't want to continue to live this way. So what happens next if you decide to split? What should you know?
Right. So if you're living in another province in Ontario and you've lived together for 10 years, the law actually recognizes that long-term relationship. Although you're not married, it does offer protections to one of the two spouses that have been living together for 10 years. That's not the case in Quebec. In Quebec, there's no specific legislation that recognizes a long-term relationship. So if you've been in one and there's a breakdown of the relationship, if you feel you've been wronged financially, if you think you are owed certain things that the law doesn't talk about, well, then you have to use these alternative measures like unjust enrichment and other types of recourses and try to kind of fit your claim into one of these more general claims. But we've seen it happen. We've seen many people try. One very successful case, we had a woman who was with an entrepreneur for many years, a 20-year relationship. She stood by his side, helped him out. He started a business. Business ended up being worth $65 million. And then when they split up, she thought she was entitled to a portion of that because she contributed and helped and supported. And the courts awarded her with $2 million as a settlement. So it is possible, but there's no question that in Quebec, it's much more difficult to have your rights recognized because there's no specific law that does so for you.
So I brought up the July 1st date, which seems a little bizarre, but maybe people when they're moving, leases are up, et cetera, they decide, hey, I'm moving anyway, or my life is changing and this will be part of that change. What do you do if you're the person who finds yourself in that situation, right? All of a sudden it's like, yeah, we're done. You have no agreement that you've ever signed before, which I guess in and of itself is a mistake, right? If you just signed something when things are going well, at least you have that to fall back on.
Right, and you're talking about a separation agreement. It's kind of weird if you think about it. You're in a long-term relationship and you're talking about an agreement as to when you're going to separate. But the couples that do that, the couples that are mature enough to know that, hey, nothing's for sure.
Right.
And while we're talking and while we're on speaking terms, maybe we should put something down on paper to address that unfortunate situation. But in Quebec, because we have July 1st as a moving date, many times people say, you know what, I think I'm going to get my own place. I think we need some space. Maybe we'll change the living arrangements, but they don't realize that, hey, your name might still be on that lease.
Right.
So if one party stops paying, you have to be able to get yourself off that lease. Other things, the TV, pets, furniture, all the things that you've accumulated over the years together as a couple. Well, it's time to start, addressing them, whether one person's going to take one thing and then the other person is going to take the other thing, or there's going to be a value attributed to all of that, and there's going to be one payment to recognize. So it gets kind of messy around this time of year. And just because in July 1st, that's where most options are when you're looking for a new space. So it's that time of year where a lot of people are dealing with potentially breaking up a long-term relationship. So
if this happens, right, and this couple living common law go that way, as you're describing, can one of the spouses file, for example, a claim for compensation?
Yeah, absolutely. And it happens a lot, more and more. We're seeing because the numbers keep going up for how many people decide to live common law. So, yeah, they file, depending on the amount of money, will determine which court you find yourself in. But that's not even to mention the fact that a lot of these long-term relationships involve children as well, common children. So there's no difference if you're married or not in Quebec with regards to what your kids are entitled to in child support and all the other expenses that the court awards the parent with custody. So it can get very, very sticky. So if you don't have a separation agreement, then sometimes, even if you don't want to, you're going to be forced to go through court because, like we said, children are involved. You're going to have to get a decision that recognizes how much money is being paid and what the custody rights are in a situation. So, again, it's not to say that one is more advantageous than the other, but there's no question that rights have to be recognized when there's a breakdown of a long-term relationship.
As you describe it, though, I think to myself, how many people, actually would think going into a relationship, and I imagine that number is pretty low, to actually sit down and say, you know what, nothing is necessarily forever. Let's come up with an agreement, or what we call a separation agreement, outlining what's mine, what's yours, et cetera. I'm guessing, as I said, that number is very, very low, which means at the end, if it's acrimonious, you end up, hating each other, whatever, having to split things up, and now you're both out there getting lawyers.
And when you touched on something that's so important, a lot of times when you are going through this breakup, sometimes it's not even a question of how much is this television worth or my name's on the sofa, but not your name. Sometimes it's a question of, hey, I'm really angry with you and I'm really not happy with you. And I don't want you to get off so easy. And I'm going to drag this thing out. And sometimes there's a lot of emotion involved. And that's where things get really, really messy. So like you mentioned, it's not only a question of being organized and anticipating a possible breakup. It's you want to try and diffuse what could be a very emotional time, and that's never good for settlements when there's emotion involved.
By the way, so you've done some homework on this, right? Typically when these things do end up in front of a judge, if they do, what ends up happening?
Well, the judge usually what has to happen is they hear both sides of the story, they hear the different claims, and there's some rough justice that has to be done. And the judges are always quick to volunteer the following and saying, you've lived together for years and years and years, and now you're going to expect me to make a decision that's going to be binding on both of you. And I've only met you for a couple of hours while you've been sitting in front of in my courtroom. So the judge has to do what's necessary. Sometimes, they get it right as much as possible, but there's no question that they often say, hey, I'm going to be making these important decisions, and I don't even know you that long. And if you guys can't settle this on your own, maybe you want to take some time right now with your lawyers, go grab one of those private consultation rooms and try to come to some sort of agreement, because if not, I'm going to decide it. And again, I don't know all the facts and I haven't been around that long to make the absolute best decision for you. So they often encourage people to try and work out a settlement before they render their own.
Yeah, which I imagine you would do too, right? If approached, rather than go through the time, the cost, and everything else, try to work it out, because that's probably your better, your better choice in the long run.
Absolutely, and you're going to be paying your lawyer to basically settle something that you're going to have to pay for, and it's going to be taking out of what you could have ended up with at the first place. So,
good advice.
Not a good situation. And again, try as much as possible to filter the emotion out of it so you can move on with your life.
Chris Dimakos, our CJAD legal contributor. Thank you, Chris.
Thank you.